thank you to the Wakefield Library. You know, I've spoken there in person in the past, and you guys do a great job with these events, and this is a great group. So thank you, everybody, for being on. And as Jeff said, you know, we're in a very unprecedented time, and it was really a weird time to be releasing a book. And Casey and I kind of discussed whether or not we should release the book now or wait until, you know, the fall or even the winter. And we talked about that with our publisher, HarperCollins. But we ultimately made the decision to release it, and it came out on Memorial Day weekend, right as we were kind of in the middle of the lockdown here in Massachusetts. And, you know, the thinking was, you know, the book was done, it was ready to come out, and people were excited to get some new books and all that, and Amazon delivery and all that. But it's funny, what we didn't count on was Amazon actually back in May and June had slowed down their book deliveries because they were so busy with doing grocery deliveries. So it was hard for people to get the book. So that was a little weird. That's since changed. People can get the book pretty quick. Now, if you order it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or from Dick Haley, you can get it pretty quickly now. The mail delivery services have kind of caught up. But, you know, bookstores are now just opening, and libraries are kind of partly open and that sort of stuff. So it's definitely a weird time. So we appreciate these kind of things to be able to come talk to people. One thing that Casey and I love to do with our books is get out and meet people and talk to them face to face, sign their books, you know, get their thoughts kind of on what they think about the book. And a lot of times what happens at these events is, you know, we'll end up talking to someone that has some sort of connection to the book, or maybe has a connection to another story that may lead us to another story. So we definitely love to meet with people that care about what we write. So thank you, everybody. I know everybody's busy. So so I'll tell a little bit about myself first, and then I'll talk about the book. I grew up in Brockton and went to Boston College. And when I came out of BC, I became a newspaper reporter, and I went to work for the paper in Taunton, the Taunton Gazette, and I covered sports there first. And then I eventually started to cover news and started to cover the courts and the crime beat. And that's kind of where I really learned what I wanted to do was, you know, digging through the court records and you know, talking to different folks involved, lawyers, judges, police officers, prosecutors, victims, witnesses, all that sort of stuff. And that's where I really learned how you can kind of tell a complete story by getting all sides of the story. So that was a real learning experience. I worked at the Taunton Gazette for about 4 years, and then I went to the paper in Attleboro, and I worked there for 2 years. And I actually left journalism for a year, and I taught high school English, which was a whole nother journey. And that was at Brockton High, where I went to school. So that was kind of interesting as well. And then I went back to journalism, went back to the Sun Chronicle, and eventually I got to the Boston Herald in 1999 and started covering a lot of hard news, a lot of breaking news, a lot of national stories. You know, we covered we had the Wakefield massacre in your town, actually, Edgewater Technology. That was in, I believe, Christmas of 2000. I covered that. Before that, I covered the Worcester cold storage fire. And then, of course, 2001, we had 9/11. I was sent down there that morning, and I was at Ground Zero when the buildings came down, and I stayed there for a couple of weeks, covered that from down there. Obviously, you know, changed the course of my career and my life like it did with so many people. And then 2003, we had the station fire. I covered that. And in between all that, I had a lot of different murder cases and serial killers and all sorts of dark, crazy true crime stuff. So that's kind of where my career went. And then around 2004, 2005, I became really a little bit burned out with the true crime. So I went into politics and started covering that. And I joined the Herald's political team. I became the City Hall bureau chief, the City Hall bureau chief at one point. I'm sorry, the State House bureau chief. And then I covered the presidential elections in 2004, 2008, and 2012. And in 2013, on April 15th, Marathon Monday, I was the Herald's City Hall bureau chief, and I was actually off because Patriots Day is a holiday, but I was going to meet someone for coffee when I got the word that the bombs had gone off. on Boylston Street, and I ended up heading down there and covering that. I kind of led the Herald's coverage through that whole disaster, and that became this book right here, Boston Strong, which I wrote with my co-author Casey Sherman. And Casey was someone I knew from he was a producer for Channel 4 in Boston, and we had known each other through the business for many years. And about a few weeks after the kind of bombing coverage ended, he reached out to me and said, "Look, I think I may do a book on the Boston Marathon bombings. I think it's a incredible story of survival, and all the people that helped each other and that sort of thing." And he said, "But I need a good reporter to help me. And you were in the middle of it, so would you like to do it with me?" So we connected. We did that book. And if you look over my shoulder here, you'll see the poster for the movie Patriots Day, which was based on this book here, Boston Strong. So, it was one of those situations where, I had 14 years at the Boston Herald, and I had many chances to write a book. I never really jumped at any of them, but when the marathon bombings happened, I was in the middle of it, and I had a lot of the primary sources that were involved in the investigation. So I said, you know what, I think it's time for me to write a book. Teamed up with Casey, and we did that, and we're very proud of that book. We're also very proud of Patriots Day, the movie, which, if anyone has seen it, it's definitely, they take some liberties with Mark Wahlberg being, superhero cop and all that stuff. But other than that, the book, the movie is really well done. The message is really, I think, very strong and sticks to what happened, which is, Boston really pulled together and helped each other through that difficult time. So that's kind of the theme of what Casey and I have done with our books ever since. So the next book we did was a book called Ice Bucket Challenge, and that was about Pete Frates, again, up from, not far from you guys, but up in, he grew up in Beverly and went to Boston College, and he was the guy who started the Ice Bucket Challenge. Boston College baseball player that was stricken with ALS, and that was a very exciting book to write as well, very inspirational. It's not really a sad story about a guy who gets ALS. It's really more about a guy who gets ALS and decides to fight it, and here's how he fought it, by creating this innovative social media philanthropical effort that has continued to marvel the world, really. They raised $250 million through the Ice Bucket Challenge. So that was a fun book. And then in 2018, we wrote this one here, 12, which is the story of Tom Brady and the Patriots and Deflategate, and that whole courtroom saga. And again, it's not really a Tom Brady book. It does definitely tell Tom Brady's kind of story. It's not his autobiography. It's not his biography. We did talk to Tom for the book, but it's more of a courtroom thriller about what happened with Deflategate and the fight between the Players Association, which is the union that represents the players, and the league over all these sorts of infractions, from the bullying scandal down in Miami to the bounty scandal in New Orleans to the Ray Rice case where he was caught on tape abusing his wife, to Tom Brady and Deflategate. And it's kind of this story about how the union was constantly butting heads with Roger Goodell and the NFL. So that was a fun book to write as well. So when that was done, and it came out, that was the fall of 2018. The book came out actually on my birthday, July 31st of 2018. And then in the fall, we were kind of thinking about what we were going to do next. And we had a few ideas. And then lo and behold, on October 18th of 2018, a man named Whitey Bulger was murdered in prison in West Virginia. And Casey and I had both covered the Whitey Bulger case for many, many years as journalists. And we never really had a reason to get into the story to write a book about it. There had been many books written about it. As Jeff explained, you go into the library, there's a pretty vast Bulger and organized crime section. Many of those cases from Boston, many of them Casey and I have written about over the years. But once he was killed in prison, we kind of looked at it and said, you know what, there's an opportunity here to tell the end of the story. And that's what we decided to do. We decided to really go after all the people that hadn't talked before, really go hard at the FBI and try to get into their case files. and also really get into the people who maybe were afraid to talk because Whitey Bulger was still alive. And so that's how we started. So we ended up partnering up with HarperCollins, and we wrote this book right here, Hunting Whitey, the inside story of the capture and killing of America's most wanted crime boss. And it's I think it's really the end of the story. It's the final chapter in the saga of Whitey Bulger. We tell the story from when he went on the run in 1995 until he's captured in 2011, and through his murder in prison in West Virginia in 2018. And a lot of these other books about Whitey Bulger focus heavily on the corruption with the FBI and his devil's deal and all that stuff, but no one had really told the story about his life on the run. What was his life like on the run? How was he captured? Who were these FBI agents that captured him, and how did they do it? And then what was his life like in prison? And ultimately, how was he put in the position to be murdered the way he was? And who were these guys who murdered him? So those are the questions that we asked ourselves, and those are the questions we answer in this book. We think we did a pretty good job. We got a lot of exclusive interviews, talked to people that have never talked before, such as Whitey Bulger's brother, Billy. Billy Bulger, as a lot of you on the call know here, was the Senate president in Massachusetts, arguably the most powerful politician in Massachusetts for many, many years. Lot of, insinuations that he kind of enabled his brother's criminal enterprise, and maybe knew a lot more about his brother's life on the run than was ever let on. We do know that Billy Bulger was called before Congress in the early 2000s, and he basically he admitted that he did talk to his brother while his brother was on the run, but he was never charged with anything. And one thing we learned from talking to the FBI in this case was that there were a lot of agents that were upset about that. And they thought that Billy Bulger should have been charged with perjury. He should have been charged with aiding and abetting and harboring a fugitive, perhaps even, for not revealing where his brother was and what he knew about his brother's whereabouts. When Whitey was ultimately caught in Santa Monica in 2011, there's a lot of people that believe that Billy Bulger knew exactly where his brother was the entire time. But when I went to Billy Bulger's house in South Boston and interviewed him for this book, he wouldn't talk about that stuff. He was very evasive, as he's been throughout his whole life. Doesn't like to talk about his brother and his brother's criminal career. But what he did talk to us about was why he thinks his brother went the way he went. And a couple of the things he told us was that, their dad was, post-depression sort of laborer for he worked on the railroad, and he apparently had some sort of accident where he lost his arm. It got cut off by a train. And that kind of set Whitey on a course in his life, because Whitey was the oldest brother. The father now only had one arm and couldn't really earn, so Bulger had to start to earn for the family. And how did he do that? He started a life of crime. His brother, Billy, also told us that Whitey was very fascinated with, gangster culture from the very early days of that genre. Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, those were Whitey Bulger's heroes. His heroes were not, FDR and Ted Williams. His heroes were Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger. So that's kind of how Whitey Bulger built his life. And he ended up in Alcatraz. He ended up a bank robber, and he ended up joining gangs in and around the streets of Boston in the 40s and 50s. And he learned how to be a criminal, and he went to Alcatraz, which, as we learned in writing this book, Whitey really considered Alcatraz his Harvard. That's where he really learned how to be a criminal. And he, throughout his life, he ended up wearing that Alcatraz time as a badge of honor. Whenever you would write a letter to someone, he would sign it with his Alcatraz inmate number. And he always looked back on that time in his life fondly, strangely. but it was kind of who he was. It was part of who he was. And another thing a lot of people may not know is that when Bulger was in Alcatraz, he was subjected to um, MK, a program called MK Ultra, where inmates were given LSD as kind of a mind control experiment. The government was looking for a truth serum, ways to get enemy combatants to reveal things and tell the government secrets that they shouldn't tell. So they tested LSD on inmates. Whitey Bulger was subjected to these tests. He was given countless doses of LSD while he was in Alcatraz. And really what that did was it made him an even worse criminal. It warped his mind. And when he came out, he was, a much worse criminal than when he went in. And when he came out, he went right back to the rackets in Boston. He took over and he ruled over the Boston underworld for the next 30, 40 years. And we all know what happened during those years. He killed several people, at least 19 by the government's count, but it's probably a lot higher. Had a lot of, he had his hand in many, many more crimes and murders. Pumped the city of Boston full of drugs, guns. He shook down gamblers. He created an alliance with the FBI where he traded information with them about the mafia in the North End in exchange for his own freedom. And what ultimately happened was, Bulger helped put away Jerry Angiulo and his whole crime mob in the North End. And once they were put away, the focus was on Bulger, but he did still have this FBI protection. And leading up to, the mid-90s, there was a lot of law enforcement efforts to kind of finally, once and for all, put Whitey Bulger away. Sorry, Freudian slip there. Put Whitey Bulger away, and as the indictments came down, Whitey still had loyalists in the FBI that tipped him off, and they were allowed to. That tip allowed him to go on the run, and he took Catherine Gregg, his longtime girlfriend. He was kind of had a common law wife named Teresa Stanley, but Teresa Stanley had a couple of kids, and she had grandkids. So when Whitey went on the run in 1995, after he was tipped off by the FBI that he was about to be indicted on a 31-count racketeering indictment, he left with Teresa Stanley, and they weren't gone for a few months when she said, "You know what, this life isn't for me." He really loved Catherine Gregg anyway, and he knew that she was better to go on the run with it anyway. So he brought Teresa Stanley home, dropped her off, took Catherine Gregg, and off they went for 16 and a half years. And a lot of what you read in Hunting Whitey is that story of what they did in those 16 and a half years, which includes, they traveled down to New Orleans, rural, a town called Grand Isle, and they befriended a family that lived in the bayou, a very simple blue-collar family that kind of just lived in a very remote area. And Whitey and Catherine, who down there were known as Tom and Carol Baxter, befriended that family, and they bought them groceries, and they had dinners with them. And Whitey took the young son, his name was Bruiser, took him under his wing and talked to him about how to be a man, and don't fight at school, stay in school, and all that sort of stuff. And it's a real, I don't want to give too much away about what their life was like down there, but there's a couple of chapters in this book about their life down there that are very, very fascinating. And that all came from interviews that Casey and I did with the family, the Gautreaux family. Eventually, the FBI did figure out that that's where they were. And there was an agent that was on his way there to catch Whitey, and he was literally within, moments of capturing him when Bulger was tipped off once again and was able to escape and got away. And that agent missed his chance to arrest them. And Bulger and Catherine left from there. They went to Chicago, and then they went to Reno and Las Vegas, and ultimately they ended up in Santa Monica, where they set up in a very nondescript suburban neighborhood, upper middle class, nice little condo, a few blocks from the beach, from the Pacific Ocean, called the Eugenia Apartments. And they lived there for the next, decade plus. And their life there was very fascinating too. And Casey and I took a trip out there. We went into the apartment. We're the only journalists that have ever been inside that exact unit. We spoke to a lot of the neighbors that talked to us about what their life was like there. At that point, they were no longer Tom and Carol Baxter. They had changed their names and changed their identities. They became Charles and Carol Gasco. That was their name. So they, everyone out there knew them as Charlie, and they just kind of, lived a very simple life. They would go out and Carol, aka Catherine Gregg, would go out and feed stray cats, and she befriended some neighbors. Whitey, aka Charlie, would go out and he was with her a lot of the time, but a lot of the neighbors didn't like him. They described him as very gruff, and they didn't see anything suspicious about him, but they just knew that he was like kind of a grumpy old man. We did go to the local sports pub. There's actually a Boston sports bar right down the street called Sonny McLean's, where the people there say that they saw Bulger in there watching Red Sox and Patriots games, which was kind of funny. So the other thing that was very interesting about it was that whole neighborhood is all wired with cameras, and the police station is literally only 0.7 miles from the apartment. So they were under police surveillance and right down the street from the police station the entire time that they were in Santa Monica, but no one ever made them until the FBI made an incredible decision to change their investigation from looking for Whitey Bulger to looking for Catherine Gregg. And the way they did that was they went through plastic surgery records. They got some information that she may be kind of a woman who maybe changed her appearance and got some enhancements. And so they put out some ads, and they found out that was true. And they found a doctor that actually did some plastic surgery on her, someone that gave her breast implants and some facial enhancements. They took those pictures that were provided from the doctor, and they did a public service announcement, and they put that out on TV. And a woman from Iceland that happened to live at that Princess Eugenia Apartments saw the media coverage of that public service announcement, and she called the FBI and said, "I know those people. That's Charlie and Carol Gasco, and they live in Unit 303 at Princess Eugenia Apartments." And that tip was found by a U.S. Marshal among hundreds and hundreds of voicemails and emails and text messages and all that. He isolated that. And the reason why he isolated it was because it was very specific. It wasn't just, "Oh, I think I saw those people in this neighborhood on this date." She said, "No, she gave names, Charlie and Carol Gasco, and she gave the exact address. So the marshal called her and said, "We got your message. How do you know it's them?" And she told them, some more details. And the marshal said, "Well, are you 100% sure that it's them?" And she said, "No, I'm not 100% sure." She said, "I'm 200% sure." So the jig was up at that point. And what happened there was, from there, they basically put together a plan to move in and capture them. The issue was they knew that Bulger had a lot of guns. They knew that he had traveled to Reno to gun shows and bought weapons. They knew that he was a gun collector. They knew that obviously he was a very violent guy. So they had to come up with a plan to lure him out of that apartment because they knew he would shoot his way out or take her as a hostage. So they came up with a ruse to tell him that his storage locker down in the garage had been broken into. So they had the building manager call up and tell him that the storage locker had been broken into, and Bulger fell for it. And he came down and he, the jig was up, and again, I don't want to give too much away, but when you read this book, we were able to secure 70 letters that Bulger himself wrote to people that he served time with in prison, an Alcatraz historian, and some other folks. And one of those letters that he wrote, he describes in extreme detail his own arrest, which is the first time we've really heard from Whitey Bulger himself. So I think, when you read this book, you're going to really learn a lot about Bulger's thought process. You're going to hear the end of the story. You're going to hear how he got caught. And again, what his life was like on the run. And a lot of that comes from Bulger's own words from these letters that we were able to obtain. So Casey and I are very proud of this book. We think it's, it's a fast read. Most people that read it tell us they read it in a couple of days. And a lot of people say that, it's one of the favorite books that they've read. And people that have read all of our books think that it's our best one. And I personally think that it is as well. So, but, so I think with that, I'd like to open it up to some questions. I don't know if Jeff and Karen want to jump in and read some of these questions, or if you guys want to.
She says, when you covered Whitey's escapades, did you ever feel unsafe? Did you ever have threats against you? And then she says she bought your book at Barnes & Noble. It was a great book. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you. And second of all, not really. I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, there were times that I covered things kind of tangentially connected to the Bulger case, where I got some threats. Like there was after he was arrested in 2011, I was in the courthouse and I had kind of a little bit of a confrontation with some members of the Bulger family. Someone bumped into me and, there was some threats that were made, but nothing major. I've been threatened over other stories more than this one, but certainly when I went to Billy Bulger's house and I went to Steve Fleming's family. Steve Fleming was Whitey Bulger's criminal conspirator that was, kind of led the gang with Whitey Bulger. I went to his family's house on occasion, and I never felt comfortable going to those houses alone. But I was never in any danger that I knew of. Hope not.
Let's hope not. We've got one from Estelle who says she loved your book, first of all, and would you comment on Whitey's murder? Was it a setup?
Yeah, so I didn't get into too much on that. So Whitey, I guess I'll finish the story. So he, after he's arrested, he goes to Tucson, and in Tucson he had some problems. I don't want to give away the story again, but people that have read the book know that he had some serious problems in Tucson. He was moved to a prison in Florida, and he had some more problems there. He had health problems. And the circumstances why he was transferred from Florida to West Virginia are very, very circumspect. His health care level was lowered mysteriously. No one knows why. He was an 89-year-old man who needed kind of round-the-clock care. For some reason, they lowered his health care requirements, which enabled them to move him to West Virginia. When he went to West Virginia, he wasn't there for 12 hours. He was put into a prison in general population. Inside that prison were several mobsters from Massachusetts. Now, if you remember from what I said earlier, Whitey Bulger's deal with the FBI was to give information about the mafia. So all those mobsters from Boston in that prison knew that Whitey Bulger spent his life ratting out their compatriots. So it was a terrible decision to put him there. In answer to the question, was it a setup? It's hard to say. We don't have the concrete evidence to say that. But what I will say is this: I'll say that it was at best it was a mistake. At worst, it was corruption at its worst. He should never have been put in that prison. The wardens in Florida and West Virginia have some explaining to do. And what we talk about in the book is that there is an active investigation into his murder. The two guys accused or that have been implicated are both mobsters from Massachusetts. One is Freddie Gius from Springfield. He's doing a life sentence for orchestrating the murder of a mob boss in Springfield, Massachusetts. And the other guy is a guy named Paul DiCollegiero, who is doing a life sentence for killing and decapitating a young woman who was ratting out, they feared was going to rat out their mafia organization up north of Boston in Burlington. And those two guys, since Whitey Bulger was killed, have been in solitary confinement at Hazleton. No one's been charged. But again, our understanding is there is an active investigation.
All right. Sue Ellen says, what happened to the woman who, Catherine is her name, right? Who was on the run with Whitey for years?
Yeah. So Catherine recently got out of prison. She served her time. She was convicted of harboring a fugitive and aiding and abetting. She served it was an 8-year sentence. She served about, I think, 6.5, 7 years of that. She got out last year on a ankle monitor. She's since fulfilled the obligations of her probation, and now she is a free woman. She lived with Whitey Bulger's family, actually, in Hingham, and now she's back in South Boston, and she's a free woman. She wouldn't talk to us. We tried very hard. We did talk to her lawyer. He's quoted in the book, but she's clearly got, knows a lot of information. Most of all, where is the money? They had, Whitey Bulger stashed money in stash boxes all over the country, and we believe the world. And the FBI wants to know where that money is. It would make sense that she would know, but she hasn't spoken.
Okay, we have another one here from Gail, who says, can you tell the story of the guy who tried to rob Whitey on the beach in Santa Monica? Who told you that story?
Yeah, so that's a great story, and that's one that Casey was able to come up with. And Casey, I believe he got that from an FBI agent that interviewed this guy. So there was, when Whitey first got to Santa Monica, one of the things that Bulger was great at was getting fake IDs. And he would, find homeless people and veterans and different people, and he'd pay them for their personal information so he could take it and make himself a fake ID. He was on the beach, and he apparently looked like just an old tourist, and a guy came up and tried to rob him at knife point, and Bulger had a gun. And and Bulger said to him, he said, never bring a knife to a gunfight. And that was the end of that robbery attempt.
Yeah, that. Have we run out of questions? I can't believe this, Wakefield. Come on.
I see 10 in here where I am. So.
Oh, well, some of those were comments that were about the chat. I think we got all the ones so far. I've been watching them come in. Did I miss anybody's? No.
Oh, okay.
I actually have a question. I'm just curious, as a writer, what's your next project? Do you feel like you want to delve into any other aspects of this story or other parts of organized crime in Boston, or are you looking to go in a different direction? What
Sure.
you might do?
So we kind of just take every story as it comes and think about what, as you saw, I mean, we went from the Boston Marathon to Ice Bucket Challenge to Tom Brady to Whitey Bulger. So we don't really have a genre other than nonfiction. So we're always just looking for a great story. But, right now what we're working on is we have a TV series in development based on this book that we're co-producing with the producers who made the movie Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood. And it would be a limited series, like a Netflix sort of thing. And we think we'll have some pretty big news on that soon. So that's kind of one focus. But Casey and I are both also looking for our next books together, and we'll probably each do one separately. Mm-hmm. I actually, looks like I'm going to be doing a book about an ATF agent that went undercover for 2 years and infiltrated the Pagan Motorcycle Club, which is the biggest motorcycle club in the country after the Hells Angels. And the thing with the Pagans is they had never been infiltrated by law enforcement. That was their claim to fame. And this guy broke that. So it's a great story. I'm kind of in final discussions now on as to whether or not I'm doing that. And Casey has a great book that it looks like he's going to do on his own about a famous serial killer case in the 1960s down in Provincetown. And then we have a couple of ideas for books that we're going to do together. So we're kind of like a band, like we'll do solo albums, we'll do something together, we'll do a solo album, maybe jam with somebody else. And, so it's, we just kind of follow where the great stories are.
They're all Boston related though. I mean, it's
mostly, yeah. But, one story we're kind of kicking around is the Las Vegas shooting.
Uh-huh.
There's a great untold story there with, there's a bit of a mystery there about why that happened, the motives and that sort of thing. So someone reached out to us about that one. So we're thinking about possibly writing about that.
Mm.
And then actually we have another one that I can't describe, but I can't specify, but a pretty major sports celebrity came to us and has a great family story, not from Boston at all, actually from California. and wants us to write their story. So, our books are, we have a certain writing style, and we really do our homework. So I think, stories are starting to come to us. So it's a lot of fun.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
Oh, actually, there is another question.
Yeah, there is another one.
Emily wants to know, who was your favorite person to interview for this?
Well, I think that it was very enlightening and exciting to sit down with Billy Bulger I sat down with him for almost 2 hours. Did not expect that. I expected that he would, shut the door in my face and tell me to get off his steps, but he invited me in. So that was interesting. The other one was a guy named Pat Nee, who was a member of Bulger's crew, who is a murderer, killed people, helped bury bodies, helped dig up and rebury bodies for Bulger. He's out of jail, and he's free. He lives in Southie, and I sat down with him in a coffee shop in Southie. That was a little unsettling, a little scary, but it turned out he was a really good guy, and he was very, very calm, but a little worried about that one when I got called for that interview. So that was strange. Casey spent a lot of time with the FBI agents who caught Bulger. Actually, the guy, Scott Garriola, who put the handcuffs on Whitey Bulger. And I think, Casey, I don't want to speak for him, but I know that, for Casey, that was a real interesting interview to hear that guy's description of, putting the handcuffs on a guy that was the number one most wanted fugitive in America. After, it was Osama bin Laden. And then after Osama bin Laden was killed in, I think it was 2004, Whitey Bulger was the number one most wanted fugitive in America. And we talked to the guy who actually put the cuffs on him. So that was interesting as well. It's been a lot of fun.
Another one come through. Sue Ellen says, when you talked with murderers, did you ever sense remorse, moral injury?
No. Dare I say I've interviewed several murderers in my career, and rarely have I heard any remorse. Even Freddie Gias, the guy who was accused of killing Whitey, he wrote to us from prison. We exchanged letters with him, and you can read all that in the book. Those exchanges are in there, and some of the things that he told us. But he held his cards very close to the vest. Didn't really divulge much information about what may or may not happen. May or may not have happened. But remember, he is serving time for killing a mafia boss. So, it's always funny to talk to these guys, and he talked to us about the Red Sox and the Patriots in these letters. So like we're just buddies at the coffee shop. So I think a lot of them, like anyone that's seen The Sopranos, I think that's a pretty good depiction where they kind of compartmentalize their lives. They have their business, their personal life, and then, their social life,
Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah.
It is strange. That's a good question, though.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else? I guess.
Well, I would like to, from my end, I'd like to wrap up with saying that, I'm so glad that you guys are doing these things, because, it's hard to watch the libraries be closed. I hate to see that. I live in Milton, and I drive by it and it's closed, and it's very depressing. So I hope you guys are able to open soon. But I think it's important to keep people engaged and reading and getting information. And I think it's awesome what a lot of the libraries are doing. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We are doing our best. And wait a minute, one more just came in. Kathleen says, if they make a movie, can you be sure Whitey is played by an Irishman, not Robert De Niro?
Yeah, so we've been talking about that, and this is going to be this won't be like old young Whitey. This won't be young Whitey. This will be old Whitey. So we're going to need a great actor in his his 60s, 70s. So we're looking at some of the people that we've been kicking around. The Woody Harrelson, Liam Neeson, Ed Harris. People along those lines. And then who's the guy from Bryan Cranston has been mentioned.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he'd be good.
Yeah, so we have a lot of great you know, and it all depends on the director that we end up landing and what studio we end up going with. So, like I
Right.
said, we think we'll have some great, no De Niro, no Pacino. I see that.
Yeah.
You got it. We may, but if De Niro or Pacino wants to play one of the Italian mobsters that Whitey rats out, I'm not going to say no to that.
No.
But no, he definitely will not be played by an Italian.
Are you hoping for a cameo in the production? Who do you want to play?
Was that
Are
a
you hoping
cameo?
for a cameo?
No, I don't think so. Nah. I'm a behind the scenes guy. But it is exciting. You know, we're hoping we can make this because we think that, you know, the story of their life on the run is a pretty unique story, and certainly how they were caught. So it could be a good cat and mouse sort of thriller.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's got all the makings.
And the prison stuff. I mean, you know, I was a big fan of the show Oz. I don't know if you guys have watched Oz, but I think there is an element to that as well, where, you know, you got an elderly gangster in his last days, you know, and how he is no longer the powerful guy calling the shots. You know, it's a very interesting dynamic. His life, the way it ended, is very. You know, a lot of karma there. A lot of karma.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, so if there aren't any more questions, I guess I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and a special thank you to Dave for being able to do this program for us. I hope you'll join us for other programs that, at least for the time being, will still be online. All of our regular programs, book clubs, and other kinds of library things are all going on Zoom. And
but you can check out books now.
Awesome. And please visit Dick. Click that link if you don't have the book yet, and buy it from Dick. He's the best.
So if you missed it, check the chat box again. It's
I put the actual link in there. You should be able to click right on it from here, actually. But it's just
HaleyBooksellers.com.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to, you can see all of his different authors that he represents, and you'll be able to sign up to purchase a signed copy.
Thank you all, and I hope to be in person soon.
Yes, we do too.
I'll come back. We're re-releasing the Tom Brady book in paperback September 1st with some new information. Then we have a book coming out in December that we wrote with James Patterson. About the last days of John Lennon in that case. So
oh wow,
that's exciting. So maybe by then we'll be able to come into the library.
We'll see.
Look forward to it.
All right.
Thank you,
Take care,
guys.
everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good night, everyone.
Bye bye.